Okay, so this is one that I wanted to address because I get this a lot, and that is all about carbs. Carbs good, carbs bad, carb cravings, right? And most of the time we feel like we're stymied in our weight loss journey because we crave carbs. And I wanted to just address that a little bit and talk about what causes carb cravings, as well as maybe how you can get rid of them. So, this will probably be a two-parter, and this is part one, because reducing your dependency on carbs does take a little bit of time, especially if you have a history of consuming them. Certain individuals even are a little bit more addicted to carbs than others, and that can be for a lot of reasons. But repairing and basically resetting your glucose tolerance and your insulin sensitivity, both of which kind of happen in conjunction, it doesn't happen overnight. Yeah, newsflash, right? Nothing really happens overnight. At least we want it to, and we know it doesn't, but it's hard sometimes to wrestle with that in our mind because we want it to. So, when the body's in a blood sugar kind of roller coaster, well, inertia takes over and it keeps you in that loop. And that's what carbs are doing. And I want to just kind of share that there are two types of carbs, right? Simple carbs and complex carbs. The carbs that we think about, the bread, the pasta, the ice cream, the sodas, the candy, all of that, those are simple carbs. And I want you to think of that as simple sugars, okay? Complex carbohydrates, we get carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates from our vegetables and our fruit, all those really good for you things. So carbs are not necessarily bad. The things that you're craving are going to be the simple sugars, those simple carbohydrates. But the good news is that the longer, once you shift and into a healthier diet profile, the longer you eat that way, the more hunger hormones kind of settle down. All right. So your flavor preferences shift. Often your palate changes. Things that didn't taste so sweet before now taste sweet because your tongue and those taste buds all start to recognize real food versus these hyper palatable kind of foods that are in our processed foods and our simple carbs. So you do just have to take it one day at a time. But let me talk about this because there are psychological strategies and physiological strategies to curbing your carb cravings. And they help you, of course, avoid sugar, eat more whole foods, stay generally healthy. But there are these two pieces of it, right? There's physiological and there is psychological. And cravings are rooted in both the mind and the body. So let's talk about a couple things. First, eating too much junk food. If you've ever gone kind of cold turkey on caffeine, like coffee, you've probably experienced a little bit of caffeine dependence. In a sense, sugar is kind of like that. Sugar is a little bit like that kind of caffeine. It has that potential to feel addictive or have encourage addiction-like behaviors. But sugar is creating this craving, and those problem foods are usually the ones that are high glycemic index carbohydrates, which just basically means they're simple sugars, okay, and easy for the body to access and super yummy. So when you eat sugar, your brain releases a bunch of dopamine. It's like a party in your body, okay? And your body is like, yes, because dopamine is the reward chemical. It makes you feel good. And your brain likes feeling good. So if it wants to repeat that feeling, if it wants to have that dopamine rush again, it requires more of that sugar. At least that's what the brain, how that interpretation happens. Okay. So when you feel good from that initial sugar in the simple carbohydrates, then you create more dopamine, then you feel happy, then your body wants to keep feeling happy. So it sends out cravings, and you have to do this whole vicious cycle over and over and over again. Now, I don't know anyone who can't help themselves around like a plain baked white potato. It's usually ice cream, right? Or sodas or sweets and pastries and cookies and cupcakes and breads and all of that. Everybody has their thing, but it's usually what we call the hyper palatable foods. It's a combination of salt, sugar, and fat, which produces the greatest response that dopamine response that creates that addiction like feeling that we have, and why it seems to get stronger. When you have those three things together, that makes the brain just have its own little party all the time. So, dopamine. Okay. The second one is blood sugar fluctuations. So, like I said, it's kind of like this roller coaster. On the macros, carbs tend to raise your blood sugar more significantly than proteins and fats. So, the extent to which is kind of depends on the food that you're consuming. If it's got higher fiber content, then it's going to have a lower blood sugar response. But the nature of the carbs can also have an impact, and that's that simple versus carb complex. Okay, so the simple sugars are going to have a very fast response, and the more complex carbohydrates are going to slow that response down. But regardless, your blood sugar inevitably will crest and then fall. How quickly or slowly it happens depends on simple carb or complex carb. But that's the process. That's that roller coaster. And we all love that high part of the roller coaster. That's that dopamine response, right? But what happens then is your blood sugar then falls. And that results in hypoglycemia, not like detrimental to everybody, but basically that just means low blood sugar. And that then turns around and sends a powerful hunger signal to you. And this is where this roller coaster becomes so dramatic, is because you're constantly getting this high and low, and you have blood glucose clearance issues and roller coaster issues creating havoc in the body. So when you have yeah, it's like riding that roller coaster. I was going to say, if you have an analogy for like riding a roller coaster of a highly ultra processed high sugar diet, you're going to be riding that roller coaster a lot. You may, and you will continue to crave sugary foods. You're going to continue to want that ride on this roller coaster. The highs and the lows, they kind of feed each other, and that's where it gets a little detrimental over time. So I want to show you how to hop off that ride and maybe buy a ticket to a different one that will be better overall for you. The other thing that I wanted to talk about when it comes to carbs is hunger. We have hunger hormones, actually. A lot of people don't think about those, but there's actually two kind of controlling this primal hunger urge. It's called ghrelin and leptin. So ghrelin is the one that basically makes you hungry. So I always think of ghrelin as growling, like your stomach growling. Okay. Ghrelin and leptin are opposites. Ghrelin stimulates the hunger, makes you hungry, and leptin satiates it, makes you feel satisfied. So ghrelin encourages you to start eating, and the leptin helps you to stop. So, when we have carb cravings, though, there's some dysregulation between those two hunger hormones. You're either getting too much of one or too much of the other, or they're happening at the wrong levels. Let's take leptin, for example. If high carb diets, starchy, simple carbs, can lead to leptin resistance. You might have heard that before. It's the inability for your leptin to really promote the feeling of fullness, which basically means it sends out the leptin, but your body kind of ignores it. So it has to send out more, and then it has to send out more, but your body still isn't getting those fullness signals. That's why we call it leptin resistance. It's resisting the leptin. And as you can imagine, this could create serious problems when it comes to overeating, right? Even knowing when you're full, promoting any of that satiety, it's not going to happen if your body's not listening to the leptin. So there's that. Now let's talk mental, because there is a mental side to carb cravings too. And that's, it's not just biology, although your mental is biology. It's also psychology. It's about habits and conditioning. So if you have ever had like gotten this habit of having this big bowl of cereal at 10 o'clock at night before you go to bed, your mind begins to habituate to that pattern, creates the habit. right? Habituate. The closer the clock draws to 10 o'clock, the stronger your cravings get. It doesn't even matter if you've eaten and you're full still, you're still going to get that craving for the cereal. This is a conditioned response. That's why we call it habits, habituating patterns, right? If you remember Pavlov, when you remember learning psychology, Pavlov was the one who found that he could stimulate salivation in dogs by just ringing a bell. And the way that worked was that the trick was to ring the bell first and then feed the dogs. And so then eventually the dogs began to associate the bell to equal, meaning mealtime, and they would automatically start to salivate even if they weren't fed. So that was that conditioned response. The bell stimulated the salivation. So think about what is it that's your stimuli. Maybe it's the sight of the ice cream in the freezer, or the whiff of the freshly baked cookies, or the clock just hitting 10 o'clock at night. The point is, you have some kind of stimuli, or maybe even more than one, that's causing that mindless kind of eating and those habits and patterns. Those are your triggers. And being unaware of those triggers is where we get into trouble. So by developing some awareness, you can kind of get back into control with that. Okay, so that's a lot for today. And I wanted to just kind of leave it there because tomorrow I want to talk about maybe some strategies about how to address these darn carb cravings. So let me just recap. Carb cravings are caused by, today, refined sugar. So those super sweet foods that cause the addiction like behavior, right? Blood sugar changes, blood sugar imbalances, riding the blood sugar roller coaster, all of those will equal this carb craving kind of appetite building in your body. Hunger hormones, also, when hunger hormones, the ghrelin and leptin, when they're dysregulated, you're going to crave more of those highly processed, highly palatable foods because those are the signals your body is getting. And conditioned responses, when just the smell of the cinnamon in the mall or the airport makes you salivate. That's a stimulus. That's a conditioned response. So, now that you know about what causes carb cravings, you're in a good position to control them. So tune in tomorrow when I talk about 6 ways to control those cravings and maybe even banish them forever. So carbs will no longer be in control. Tune in then. See you later.